Hey, Chuck Dixon back again to answer your questions about what it is that I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Uh, Here we go. First question. Mark Randall asks, what do you think of Walmart getting into comics and their deal with Allegiance? Do you think it will hurt mom and pop comic shops or get people more interested in comics? Well, mom and pop comic shops are not entry level for comic book readers. The average person, well, beyond the average person, 90% of the population of this country will never set foot in a comic book shop ever. Okay. Not even to get out of the rain. They just won't do it. So even kids, I mean, you could put toys in the window and colorful superhero posters, and, you know, they're not going to go in for whatever reason. And the main reason is that they don't know anything about comic books. Their fever for comic books has not been fed or started, initiated. Once upon a time when you saw comics everywhere, drugstores and convenience stores and places like that, um, a certain percentage of kids exposed to those comics became fans and were far more likely to pursue it as a hobby and obviously far more likely to go into a comic shop. But, you know, way back when, at the dawn of the direct market, a lot of the retailers complained to the major publishers about competition from the newsstand. And what neither the retailers nor the publishers seem to understand is the newsstand was um, the first hit of crack. It was the newsstand was the first exposure. If you were going to get the comic bug, you're going to get it at the newsstand. You weren't going to walk into a comic shop cold. You were going to see comics at the newsstand and then find characters you like and pursue them. And if you became a fan, then further pursue more comics. I mean, why doesn't this make sense? So Walmart, Allegiance, and through their distribution deal with Walmart, are actually doing the comic book retailers a favor by introducing people to comic books in places like Walmart that they are used to going. And thank goodness they've got their little comic book rack actually in the book and magazine aisle where it belongs, not stuck over with the tchotchkes and the trading cards. And, Mitch Breitweiser and his gang, some extraordinarily talented people, Kelsey Shannon, David Williams, just two of the many names he has working for him who are just top talent people. And they're going to create some good comics, some good mainstream mass appeal comics, the kind of stuff that just might draw in new readers. And look, this stuff's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I wish them only the best, and I don't see them as competition. I see them as trying to help to grow the comic book reading public. Next question. Any tips on how to efficiently research a story? How do you get what you need without wasting time or getting lost in it? Are there some trusted go-to sources for information? Are there sources you avoid? Well, any writer has a lot of books. You just can't seem to get away from it. Books and coffee. That's what writers are made out of. And you can gather your own research. And luckily, I got into the writing business, relatively late in life. 32, I got into the business. So I'd read a lot. Lived a little, read a lot, and gathered a lot of reference. Here's one of my World War II shelves. Now, the thing is, when you work in comics, it's not enough to know stuff. You have to be able to show stuff. So if I'm doing some sort of a genre book, a Western or historical thing, or World War II, or whatever, I like to help out the artist by providing reference um, as much as I can. So I have a huge collection of visual reference, even though I'm not an artist. Here's my casual go-to rolling cart for when I'm working on something, and I just gather all the books I might need to leaf through. I know some of them are just stuck there because I didn't have another place for them. But for the most part, these are research books placed there for a purpose, for something that I am working on. Um, Now, there's always search engines. Search engines are convenient if I need like details about something. Um, I'm writing a story that involves an old stern wheeler paddle, steamboat, stern wheeler paddle boat, and I don't know anything about them, but online I was able to find diagrams. So I knew what the different areas were called. I know now that the first floor of cabins is the saloon, the top floor of cabins is the Texas deck, things like that. Very helpful to make it sound as if I'm authoritative in what I'm writing about. And of course, it's a wealth of images. You use a search engine and find all kinds of images, and then I can easily cut and paste these images right into my scripts that go to the artists. So if I'm asking for something particular for him to draw, I can help him out. I can either send him um, a web address where you can look at the images himself, or send suggested images. Failing that, I'll scan stuff out of books. Failing that, I'll draw something myself. So there you go. But you got to watch out with research because everything's not right. You know, um, cordite, cordite. You hear about cordite all the time in action stories. The smell of cordite. As I learned very humiliatingly from Larry Hama when I used cordite in a story, is that cordite was an element used in gunpowder for a very, very brief time in the British Empire toward the end of the 1800s. And it is not a component of gunpowder today. It has not been a component of gunpowder for a very long time. So it's a journalistic cliche and a fictional cliche. And I've seen even very good writers use it. I've seen writers who know better, should know better, use it. But perhaps they use it because it's evocative and to hell with accuracy. I don't know. But I avoid it. Roger Crooks writes, I love the 1992 famous comic book creators trading cards, and I'm curious to where and how they took your photo. Unlike many of the others, your photo looks more professional and planned. Did you provide the photo or did Eclipse folks take it? And he has more, but we don't have time for that. So, yeah, Eclipse did this great set of trading cards of comic book creators. And yeah, they were I don't remember who took the picture. I don't know if Dean took it or if they actually hired a photographer. But they got a lot of us at the Chicago Con and took our pictures there. And that's where my picture was taken. And then, of course, the pictures were hand colored. They were shot in black and white and then hand colored, which is kind of interesting. Um, and as you can see here, there's lots of the greats. It was an interesting idea, trying to make stars out of us. And just like trading cards, there were stats on the back and a single panel from something we had written. So it was kind of cool. And yeah, here's my card. Yeah, the 80s hit me hard. I fell out of the 80s tree and hit every branch on the way down. So there you go. Back when I had almost black hair. So Chris Wilson says, ever consider writing superhuman type novels, something a little more out there than, say, Levon? Um, yeah, my Bad Time series is about as out there as I want to get with novels. I have a standing offer from a publisher to write a trilogy. That would mean 3 novels based on any kind of superhero universe I would want to create. And I don't know. Writing a comic book basically with no pictures. I don't know. I mean, I had some ideas, but maybe I'll get jazzed about it. Maybe I'll come up with an idea so irresistible that I'll have to go for it. But for right now, I'm sticking with westerns, time travel epics, and vigilante crime because, quite frankly, they sell better than superheroes. I don't know how superheroes sell to prose readers. I can't imagine they sell that well. Anyway, I'm thinking out loud now, so let's move on. How close were you to doing a Western series at CrossGen? Not very close. This is about as close as I got. There were 2 issues of Crux set in I can't remember now if it was an alternate history thing or a hologram thing. I don't even remember what this was, but it gave Steve Epting and I a chance to do a Western. and that's about as close as I got. Now, um, there were plans, if CrossGen became a big success and everything. Here's a little bit more from that anyway. There were plans if CrossGen became successful, um, that we would get around to doing a western. Mark Alessi liked westerns, and I had a plan for like an Empire type western. Empire type western is like Bonanza or High Chaparral or The Virginian. It would be about the movie Red River. Basically, I wanted to do something like that to see the beginnings of a cattle ranch up until, and then, basically each issue would move you ahead a year. So like at the end of, say, a 2-year run, you would see these people, become successful, go on their first cattle drive. But we never got to it. One aside was uh, that everybody knew I wanted to do a Western, but instead I did a pirate book. And I had to do the pirate book as an end run around Mark because I kept talking about the pirate book, but nobody took me seriously. So I just took it in hand um, to basically move Steve Epting over to a pirate book. And we just started working on it. We didn't ask anybody's permission. As they say in the military, it's better to apologize than ask permission. So we started working on it, and of course it was gorgeous. And Mark didn't see it until the first issue was well in progress. I mean, I think Steve was up to like page 12, and Mark was like, "What's this for?" "Oh, it's for this new book Chuck and I are doing." So Mark appeared in my doorway and said, "What the hell? I didn't create this company so you could do whatever you want." And I said, "That's right, because if I was doing whatever I want, Steve would be drawing a Western right now." So there you go. That's as close as we got. Is there a character you've wanted to work on but haven't yet? Is there an artist, past or present, you wish you could collaborate with? Well, I ran down, in a previous video, a bunch of characters, Fantastic Four, Judge Dredd, the Jetsons, that I would like to work on. So you can go back and look at that video. I think it's the one prior to this, where I go into some detail about the characters that I would like to someday work on. Artists that I wish I could have collaborated with, hands down, no question, Wally Wood. Why? Why not? I mean, Wally Wood. Wally Wood to me is comics. When I think of comic books, I think of Wally Wood. This guy had it all. Between him, Kirby, and Ditko, they were the visionaries. They were the pioneers of American comic books as far as visuals go. I mean, they created all of this sci-fi gadgetry and all these things we see in movies now. From Star Wars to whatever you can name. These guys came up with it all first. They dealt with this imagery first. They invented the look of modern sci-fi, even though they were doing it in the 50s. And the thing that appeals to me about Wally is he liked the kind of stuff I liked, big action and, touches of humor. And, plus the guy could just freaking draw, you know, action, you know, women, drama, and any genre you drop the guy into, he owned it. He just owned it. And I think, I know he was a bit of a prickly pear, but I've worked with prickly pears before. And I think that he and I would have shared some sensibilities. And, other than me just being a big fan of his, he and I were fans of a lot of the same stuff. And I just liked his earnest approach to everything. I hear stories he was a curmudgeon and everything else. Well, he might have been a curmudgeon uh, to hang around with, but he was certainly earnest about the work. I mean, you can see it here. This guy cared. Look at all that detail. Look at the depth in those pages. Yeah, I want to work with a guy who brings it like this. And also, he was also a guy who was simpatico with the plight of a freelancer. He was kind of a hard luck guy himself, and he was always looking for ways to better the lives of freelancers. I mean, he did the first professional fanzine. He was the first guy to break away and publish something on his own, a magazine called Wits End. And he would often he would often give you a peek behind the curtain of what it was like to be an artist. Share things like this, Wally Wood's 22 panels that always work. um, creating shortcuts for artists, trying to show newbie artists, how it's done, how you can work smarter, not harder. And you know, yeah, that's the kind of guy I want to work with. I mean, um, guy dedicated to his craft, dedicated to doing this stuff, and wanted to do quality work above all else. He really wanted to do quality work, and yeah, that's my kind of guy. Okay, Joel Mangrum says your favorite story idea that you are not allowed to tell. All right, well, this is the story that got me to CrossGen. I proposed a it wasn't really a cross company event, but it would have involved more than one title, and it would have impacted all of the bad titles. My idea was that the spoiler take over Robin's job for a while. And why? Because Tim Drake would quit being Robin for a while and go work for Ted Kord, the Blue Beetle. And the Blue Beetle, who was ill at the time, and I was responsible for that. I gave Ted a debilitating disease that was forcing him to no longer be the Blue Beetle. My idea was that Robin would fill in for Ted Kord. He would be the new Blue Beetle. And it seemed like a really cool fit because Tim Drake was so techy. And Tim Drake was more akin, personality wise, to Ted Kord than he ever was to Bruce Wayne. So while he was gone, the spoiler would be Robin. And my proposal was that spoiler would take over for Robin for 6 months. We would have a Blue Beetle miniseries that would introduce Tim Drake as Blue Beetle. And and then eventually, Tim Drake would go back to being Robin, and Stephanie Brown would go back to being Spoiler, and everything would go back to the way it was. It's a perfect illusion of change kind of story, but it would launch the Blue Beetle. And of course, with Tim Drake leaving, Ted Kord would have to find a new Blue Beetle, and the idea being that eventually the Blue Beetle would franchise the Blue Beetle. So there would be a Blue Beetle in every uh, city and town. He would finance it and train them and all the rest of it. And I kept proposing this for like a year and a half, and I kept getting shot down. And one of the group editors I heard hated Blue Beetle. So I presented him the whole thing without telling him who Tim Drake was going to be take over for. And he goes, I love this, I love this, I love this. And I said, yeah, well, who's he take over for? The Blue Beetle. I hate the Blue Beetle. And it died there. I mean, he loved the concept because of some, perverse dislike of the character. It got shot down. And it got shot down over and over and over again. And it kind of told me, okay, if you can't see why this is a good idea, from a marketing point of view, from a sales point of view, from a resurrecting of a character point of view, then it's obvious that my creative input is no longer welcome here as it once was. And I moved on to CrossGen. So there you go. But of course, like any writer, there's tons of stories that I never got to tell. But this is the one that, obviously rankles me to this day. Do you still get a rush seeing your name on bookstore shelves? No, not really. Not really. And I don't go to bookstores that often. Who does? I find bookstores depressing. Um, there's not a lot of independent bookstores around here. I will go to like used paperback shops, but a standard bookstore, uh, you know, you know, rack after rack of Bill O'Reilly books and celebrity biographies and children's books written by politicians. And no, no. The rush I get out of writing is what you see right here, just sitting, making stuff up. Okay, that's the kick. I get a kick out of seeing artwork, my words turned into pictures. That's always a thrill. And it's cool when the comp copies come and I get to see the comic. But yeah, seeing my name in print, it just means that I did my job. Dan Donovan says Pinnacle Books has had great success selling Westerns at Walmart using the William W. Johnstone brand. I've read a couple of them. Could that audience be tapped into for Western comic books? Short answer, no. A few years ago, and I know these aren't Westerns, but they're closely related, Gary Quapis and I spent a bunch of our hard-earned dough self-publishing something called Civil War Adventure. You can still buy it. We sold everything to Dover Books. We sold all the content to Dover Books. and they still publish the 2 volumes. And we tried this out, and Gary worked hard marketing this thing. He went to Civil War reenactments and Civil War shows and everything else. And what we discovered at these shows was that most people don't care about comics. In fact, most people really don't like comics. They especially don't like comics when they intrude in their favorite area of interest. I mean, I went to a couple of these shows with Gary, and there was an open resentment toward the fact that we were doing comic books of their, treasured era of history. And even when we tried to explain, well, you might want to get your kids and grandkids interested in the Civil War, and wouldn't this be a way to do that? You know, and no, they didn't. They didn't see it. They didn't see it at all. And that makes me think that Western fans, Western prose fans would be the same way. The problem with Western comics is that Western fans don't like them, here in the United States anyway, and comic fans don't like Westerns. So you're kind of squeezed in between the two groups. Anyway, that's it for this segment. If you would, go to Amazon.com and check out All Hero Q. It's Roland Dane, former Treasury agent on the run from a worldwide conspiracy, and his only friend is a mysterious entity known as Q on the other end of a smartphone. You might enjoy it. I think you might. Okay, that's it for me. Chuck Dixon out. See you down the road.